what's up YouTube? Today we bring you some very sad news. Today is the day we go over the death of one of the most iconic items in PoE history, the Headhunter belt. And this belt is pretty much completely destroyed. This is actually one of the comments on Reddit or a post. And it says Headhunter has lost 80 to 90% of its power in one patch. And that's pretty much what it feels like, right? This is probably one of the biggest changes for how mapping feels like in softcore trade in the end game. Like when you have your character set up, you're wanting to blast some triple beyond. The maps just don't feel the same anymore. You feel a little bit more powerful, but shrines in the goal is definitely way more powerful than what Headhunter currently feels like. And it's actually kind of sad, right? But with how shrines are still in the game, if you buy a Gloom Shrine Sextant or any Shrine Sextant and you put shrines and domination on the map, you'll pretty much feel just like a Headhunter did, right? But if you're only using this belt and not using shrines, then your build probably feels completely poop compared to what it felt like last league, especially if you're blasting some double beyond or something like that. So let's go over what actually changed with the belt and if I think that GGG will actually fix the belt because they never intended for this to happen, or maybe they did and we're all fooled. But I did actually buy something last league, so let's go check it out, right? So I actually have this skin for my Headhunter right here, that Bloodthirsty Headhunter skin, right? And it makes me kind of sad. I wanted to use the belt, but the belt is just, I don't know, it's just not very good, right? So I have this MTX skin. I bought all of the maps for the Battle Pass. And you know what? I'm almost considering now, if you see here, there's a Mage Blood skin, right? A Mage Blood, and I actually have a Mage Blood now. And I'm almost convinced. What is this thing? I'm almost convinced that I just want to buy the battle pass. I don't know if that's the whole gist of the Headhunter nerf, but I really feel like it. I should buy the battle pass, right? But let me know down in the comments below if I should buy the battle pass for the Mage Blood. So in order to understand what happened to this poor belt, we have to understand what happened to the game, and it's actually something that a lot of people hate. I don't really mind it now so much anymore, especially after they removed Invulnerable and I found out that Corpse Detonator is a huge bright explosion. So I just need to get it in my mind, see huge bright explosion, don't stand in it, right? Pretty simple. But basically, GGG replaced rare modifiers with the Arch Nemesis modifiers like these from last league, right? Everyone remembered the Arch Nemesis mods. And this was to the joy of Raid class. Everyone rejoiced around the world as rares now had 3 Arch Nemesis modifiers, or they used to have even 4. And then because everyone started complaining and there was not much joy left in the world, they decided to have only one instance of each one modifier on the baseline. Before, rares would have 2 baseline modifiers and magic monsters would have 1, but now rares would only have 1 too, right? And the reason behind this is because it was just too strong. A lot of people were complaining that the rares were just too tanky with the Arch Nemesis mods. And because the Arch Nemesis modifiers are so strong, or GGG believes so, GGG decided that the Headhunter and Inspired Learning could only steal 1 instance of each modifier. And what this means is that if you have a Hasted buff, you can't get the Hasted again. If you have Berserker, you can't get it again, right? As people have told me that the way that the Headhunter is coded, like it does not refresh the duration. So say you have a hasted buff on you right now. You kill a mob with hasted, it actually doesn't refresh the duration of the hasted, and you just can't gain the hasted buff until the original hasted buff has dropped off. So let me know down in the comments below if this is true in your testing. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't really tested it out. And people who run like the triple beyond maps, they've already gone standard with like the maximum juice possible. And they've only reached around 10 to 20 buffs, which is an absurdly low amount if you're doing triple beyond with maximum juice, right? Because people used to reach like 50, 60 buffs all the time. Now, what has happened to the price of Headhunter? Well, the price has dropped drastically, right? So this is a 35x belt, 30x belt. And yesterday it actually spiked up to 50x. Now you might be wondering why it's a spike. Was there a buff? Well, people are anticipating that there is going to be a buff. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But basically, GGG is probably going to buff Headhunter in some way. But you can see here, this is the most recent results, and it says 43x at the lowest. At this point in the league, Headhunter is already usually like 100x, 90x around there. And this is probably one of the lowest prices that Headhunter has ever been, especially at this stage in the league. Only time I've seen Headhunter lower in price was in Harvest, when people were pretty much just running the T4 seed plots with maximum rarity and shedding out a bunch of uniques. So why is the belt so bad? Now this is a question for the ages. I actually don't think that Headhunter is that bad in a vacuum. Like, if you put a Headhunter on and you go do a map, you'll feel a lot stronger. And it's probably going to be better than any other belt slot you could put on, right? Because it gives you a bunch of defenses. Now, the nice thing to know about Arch Nemesis modifiers is Arch Nemesis modifiers are very tanky in general. Like, that's why when you originally played the game before they nerfed the mods, you would notice that it was actually very hard to kill all the mobs because they were so tanky. And using the Headhunter or Inspired Learning makes you very tanky while mapping. And that's something that's definitely true. You steal Soul Eater or something, it's really strong. So Headhunter is still very good. But the problem with Headhunter is that there exists a jewel called Inspired Learning. Now, Inspired Learning does exactly the same thing as Headhunter, pretty much. If I mapped with one or two Inspires versus Headhunter, there's a lot of times where I wouldn't even be able to tell the difference with it. And I did test this out a lot of times. So what Inspired Learning does is it allows you to gain one of its modifiers for 20 seconds. So you'll always gain one Arch Nemesis modifier generally. So this is actually a pretty big deal in that since the rare monsters only have one baseline Arch Nemesis modifier, Headhunter is a lot worse comparatively to Inspired Learning. And I do think that if Inspired Learning didn't exist, Headhunter would still be used. It's just that Headhunter would just not be the same as before. And a lot of times people say, oh, you can get like up to 80 buffs or 60 buffs because there's a lot of Arch Nemesis modifiers in the pool. Well, the fact of the matter is that most of the Arch Nemesis modifiers are extremely rare. You're not going to see Aracali's touch, Tukuhama's touch, or Innocent's touch every time. You rarely see it. So in reality, the mod pool for Arch Nemesis modifiers is probably like 20 or 30, right? So it's actually pretty hard to get an insane amount of buffs, and it just doesn't feel the same at all. And because Inspired Learning exists, Headhunter is really relegated to bad because the belt slot is extremely important, especially with Mage Blood that can be used. So next up, we have the question is, will they buff the Headhunter belt somehow because it's such an iconic item? I think it is important to note that Chris did say in the past that he was the one who lobbied to keep Headhunter in its original state of power. I know he said that a lot of the design team do not like what Headhunter does to the game. And it is true to a certain extent. A lot of builds, or mapping builds in general, are pretty much just get the Headhunter belt, put Beyond on the map, and everything dies. Well, at the same point now, you could say every single mapping build should be, if you're weak, is get a shrine, get a goal, put domination on your Atlas passes, buy a Gloom Shrine Sextant, and you can pretty much clear any map in the game, any juice map in the game, and it will feel really good if you use shrines. So it's pretty much the same concept. So you can pretty much expect them to probably nerf shrines. Now, I truly believe that Chris got bamboozled by his design team, right? Because I think Chris actually looks out for us and he likes the Headhunter belt. So the design team probably told him that the Arch Nemesis modifier should only have one, and players would probably still be very strong. And I think Chris just said, like, oh yeah, that sounds good. Arch Nemesis is pretty strong. And because he did say in the Bay class that with the new Arch Nemesis modifiers, Headhunter was going to be the same power, and it was not his intention to nerf the belt or make it feel weaker. So I honestly think he got bamboozled by the design team who wanted to nerf Headhunter, and he just delivered the bad news. And so he was pretty much the bearer of wrong news, and he delivered a message that was skewed, right? But I don't know. That's just my tinfoil theory. Not really sure if that's actually true. But basically, there is a buff that's being promised soon, but will it bring Headhunter back to its glory days? I really don't think so, because I don't think they actually like the state of the game with the belt, right? Because the belt makes it so that everything is trivial. But in the Reddit post that Chris wrote, he said that we're aware that this change is an implicit nerf to Headhunter unique. So this is the nerf to the number of Arch Nemesis modifiers a rare can have from 2 to 1 as a baseline. So we'll find a way to counter buff this in the next few days. It's been 5 days already, so I think after this video, it's honestly possible that the Headhunter belt has already been buffed to its former glory days. And they said we don't intend to reduce the power of Headhunter as a result of the change. We'll also investigate the challenges. So what this means is, what can they actually do to buff Headhunter? Like, the most obvious buff is to just let all of the mods stack infinitely so that you can have multiple instances of the Arch Nemesis modifiers. But even if that happened, the Headhunter belt would not be anywhere near the same as before, because there's just not that many good Arch Nemesis modifiers. Another thing that can happen is they can make it so that Headhunter, the mods that the Headhunter steal are double the effectiveness of Inspired Learning, and that would kind of make it stick out compared to Inspired Learning. Or they can just nerf Inspired Learning, right? Or remove Inspired Learning, but that wouldn't be good either. Because the reason why Headhunter is bad is because Inspired Learning exists. I mean, why would you use a belt slot when Mage Blood exists or some other belt that gives you a bunch of damage, like a Implicit attribute belt, when you could just use one Inspired Learning and sacrifice like 2 or 3 passive points in a jewel socket? But overall, I do think that Headhunter will never be the same as in the past. I honestly think that Headhunter is going to be dead regardless of whatever buff. But I could be wrong. They could say we're going to let it stack infinitely and we're going to double the effectiveness of the Arch Nemesis mods when you steal them. And also another thing to note is that Headhunter actually feels a lot worse than it could be because there's no Beyond on a map device. A lot of people don't realize that without Beyond, Beyond is what made Headhunter work, right? So without Beyond on the map device, it feels a lot worse. And how OP shrines are, it also makes Headhunter feel really useless because why have a Headhunter when Acceleration Shrine literally feels like what Headhunter used to feel like? And I do think that Magic Find build suffers a lot from this because Magic Find builds actually relied on Headhunter buffs a lot to do their juice maps, and that means that Magic Find builds will probably have to do lower tier maps, or they can just abuse the shrines. And I do think that shrines are probably next up on the chopping block of getting nerfed. And this is pretty much long lived the Mage Blood Inspired setup. I do think that Mage Blood with 2 Inspired is going to be the best setup by far for mapping, or even like a Synth Implicit belt with 2 Inspireds or 1 Inspired. And this is pretty much what someone said on Reddit. I think that this actually summarizes Headhunter now. I tried my Headhunter Magic Find build in Standard yesterday for fun. Finally, the I only wear the Headhunter for the stats mean is unironically true. Could not even tell I had a Headhunter on. So I know a lot of people who used to boss, they try to put on a different belt and they can't put on a different belt because Headhunter just has so many stats on it, right? So that's pretty much the general gist. It's pretty much a stat stick. But thanks for watching, everyone. Let me know down in the comments below if you like the change to Headhunter no longer dominating the meta, and if you think that Shrines will probably be gutted in the next patch. But thanks for watching. I hope you find more mirrors, exalts, and mage bloods to me, and see you next time. Bye.